The air in X-7b asteroid mining station tasted like metal and desperation. Recycled 1,000 times, it hung thin and stale in the dim industrial corridors, carrying the whispers of those who had come seeking fortune and found only survival. The station itself was a forgotten outpost, a rusted skeleton clinging to a barren rock at the edge of civilization, far from the watchful eyes of the central authorities. Kale moved through the shadows of the maintenance tunnels with practiced silence. His uniform, once crisp and emblazoned with engineering insignia, now hung loose and faded, stripped of rank after the incident. 5 years had passed since that day, but the weight of those lost lives still pressed against his chest with each breath. Now he was just another disposable worker, maintaining the ventilation systems that kept everyone from suffocating in the void. Just finish the inspection and get back, he muttered to himself, checking the flickering display on his wrist terminal. The readouts from Junction 17 were inconsistent again, requiring a manual check in the least trafficked section of the lower decks. He passed through the security checkpoint with a perfunctory nod to the board guard, who barely glanced up from his screen. The farther Kale ventured from the populated areas, the more the station revealed its decay. Exposed wiring hung from ceiling panels, moisture collected in corners, and the emergency lighting flickered intermittently. The irregular readings led him to an abandoned storage bay. The door's mechanism protested as he forced it open, the grinding sound echoing down the empty corridor. Inside, stacks of forgotten cargo containers created a labyrinth of shadows and dust. "Hello, station maintenance," he called out, more from habit than expectation of response. Something felt wrong. His scanner showed unusual heat signatures deeper in the room. A soft sound, fabric against metal perhaps, made him freeze. Then, the unmistakable whimper of child. Kale moved cautiously toward the source, hand instinctively reaching for the utility knife at his belt. Behind a wall of containers, in a small alcove formed by damaged panels, he found them. A woman, gaunt-faced and hollow-eyed, crouched protectively over 2 children. The older one, a girl with tangled dark hair, stared at him with fierce, calculating eyes. The younger, a boy who couldn't be more than 5, trembled visibly, his breathing labored and face flushed with fever. The woman's body tensed like a cornered animal's. In her hand, a jagged piece of metal gleamed dully in the low light. "Stay back," she warned, her accent unfamiliar, thicker and more melodic than the standard speech of the central systems. Kale raised his hand slowly. "I'm just maintenance. I'm not security." The woman's eyes darted to his insignia, then to his face, studying him with desperate intensity. Her clothing was strange, layers of rich fabric, now torn and soiled, with intricate patterns that spoke of a culture far removed from the utilitarian aesthetics of the station. "You are human," she said finally, a statement rather than a question. "Last I checked," Kale replied cautiously. A bitter laugh escaped her cracked lips. "They said I was worthless without a male. But my children need you, human." Her voice broke on the last word, pride crumbling under the weight of necessity. "They will die if I cannot get help. My son burns with fever. We have not eaten in days." Kale felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the same sensation he'd felt when the alarms first blared that day, when he'd had to choose between protocols and people. He made the wrong choice then. "You can't stay here," he said, glancing back toward the door. "Security sweeps this section every 48 hours. Then we die here or die elsewhere," she said simply. "It makes little difference now." The boy coughed weakly, and the woman's fierce expression cracked further, revealing raw terror beneath. Kale closed his eyes briefly. Every instinct told him to walk away. He had survived this long by becoming invisible, by never drawing attention. Taking in 3 fugitives, for they were clearly running from something, could destroy the fragile existence he had built. "I have a maintenance alcove in Section 8, he heard himself saying. "It's off the security patrol routes. It's not much, but there's clean water access." The woman didn't move. "Why would you help us?" "I haven't decided if I am yet," Kale answered truthfully. But the boy needs water and medicine, at minimum. She studied him for a long, tense moment, then slowly lowered the makeshift weapon. I am Lyra, she said formally. These are my children, Alara and Reese. Kale, he replied simply. Can they walk? Alara can. Reese. She looked down at her son with naked worry. Kale checked his terminal again. The next shift change is in 20 minutes. That's our window to move unseen. He hesitated, then removed his outer jacket and offered it to her. Put this on. Keep your head down. If anyone asks, you're a technician with a certification issue. Lyra accepted the jacket, but didn't put it on immediately. If you betray us to the authorities... I'm not exactly on good terms with the authorities myself, Kale interrupted. Now decide. We need to move soon. She nodded once, wrapping the too large jacket around her shoulders, then gathering the boy into her arms. Lead the way, human. The Section 8 maintenance alcove was little more than a forgotten service junction where 3 major ventilation shafts converged. Years ago, Kale had discovered the space and gradually adapted it into a private refuge. A partition wall salvaged from a decommissioned cabin section created a small room, invisible to casual inspection. Inside, he kept an emergency cot, basic supplies, and a cooling unit he'd repaired from scrap. No one comes here? Lyra asked as he sealed the hidden entrance behind them. It's officially condemned due to radiation concerns, Kale explained, activating the dim emergency light. I falsified the readings myself. The space looked smaller with 4 people inside. Kale gestured to the cot. Put the boy there. Lyra hesitated, then gently laid Reese down. The boy's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and glazed. Alara, Lyra said quietly, stay with your brother. The girl, who hadn't spoken a word, nodded and sat rigidly beside the cot, her watchful eyes never leaving Kale. He turned to his storage locker, pulling out a canteen of clean water and a small medical kit. This is temporary, he stated, handing them to Lyra. A few days at most, until the boy is stronger. A few days is more than we had, she replied, carefully measuring water into her son's mouth. Kale watched them for a moment, then moved toward the exit. I need to complete my shift or they'll notice. There's protein paste in the locker. It tastes terrible, but it's nutritionally complete. Wait, Lyra called as he reached the door. Thank you. Kale nodded uncomfortably. Lock this behind me. 3 short knocks, then 2 long ones when I return. As he slipped back into the station's arterial corridors, Kale wondered what madness had possessed him. 5 years of careful anonymity, jeopardized for strangers who would likely bring nothing but trouble. Yet as he mechanically performed his duties for the remainder of his shift, his thoughts kept returning to the boy's fevered face and the woman's desperate words. They said I was worthless without a male. The fragment of a memory surfaced. His sister's voice on the last transmission before her colony ship was reported lost. You can't save everyone, little brother. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't save anyone. 3 days stretched into a week, and the temporary arrangement took on a reluctant permanence. Kale continued his work routine while smuggling supplies back to the alcove, water purification tablets, ration bars from his own allotment, a cooling cloth for Reese's persistent fever. Each time he returned, the knock pattern was answered with agonizing slowness, as if Lyra debated whether to open the door at all. Her caution was justified. Discovery would mean detention for all of them. On the 8th night, he returned to find Reese awake for the first time, propped up against salvaged cushions. The boy's fever had broken, though his face remained thin and pale. His breathing is better, Lyra said quietly as Kale set down his day's collection of supplies. She sat cross-legged on the floor, mending a torn garment with thread unraveled from another. Kale nodded, noticing how Alara had positioned herself between him and her brother, a small sentinel with solemn eyes. I brought something, he said, reaching into his pocket and producing a small mechanical toy, a simple robot figure with articulated limbs that he'd found discarded in a waste processing unit and repaired during his shift. He offered it to Alara, who stared at it without moving. It's broken, she said, her first words to him in 8 days. No, just complicated, Kale replied. He knelt down, setting the toy on the floor and demonstrating the hidden catch that activated its walking mechanism. The toy took 3 jerky steps forward, then stopped. Alara's expression didn't change, but her eyes followed the toy's movement with undisguised interest. "You can have it," Kale said, standing up again. After a moment's hesitation, the girl reached out and picked up the toy, turning it over in her small hands with careful precision. "Thank you," she whispered, not looking up. Kale felt something shift in the room's atmosphere, a microscopic thaw in the glacier of suspicion between them. "The air recycler is making a noise," Lyra commented, her needle continuing its steady rhythm, a clicking sound when it cycles. Kale moved to examine the unit recessed in the wall. "Probably dust in the filter. How long has it been doing that?" "Since midday. I was concerned it might fail." He found a source of the problem quickly, a loose filter housing, and tightened it with a few turns of his multi-tool. "Should be fixed now." "You're good with machines," Lyra observed. "I was an environmental systems engineer," Kale replied, the past tense heavy in his mouth. "Before." Lyra's hand stilled. "Before what?" Kale didn't answer immediately. He'd avoided personal disclosures, limiting their interactions to practical matters of survival. But in the quiet alcove, with the soft sound of Reese's improved breathing, the walls he'd built seemed momentarily permeable. "There was an accident," he said finally. "A coolant leak in a residential section. Protocol said to seal the area immediately, prevent contamination spreading to the whole station." He stared at the recycler, seeing instead the flashing warning lights of that day. There were still people inside. 37 of them. The silence stretched between them. "You sealed it," Lyra said, not a question. "I followed protocol," Kale replied, the familiar bitterness rising in his throat. "And then I tried to override it when I realized there was a workaround. But by then, security had locked me out of the systems. They died because I was too slow to question my orders." He closed the access panel with more force than necessary. "The inquiry cleared me of technical wrongdoing. But everyone knew, so they demoted you. They suggested I be more comfortable in a less critical position." His laugh was hollow. "Turns out not many people want to work alongside someone who sealed 37 people to their deaths." "You tried to save them," Lyra pointed out. "Too late." She was quiet for a moment, her needle resuming its rhythm. "My people believe that intent matters as much as outcome. You intended to save them." "Your people?" Kale echoed. "Where are you from?" Lyra's expression closed again. "Far from here." "That much is obvious," he said dryly. Another silence fell, this one heavier than before. Kale moved toward the door, ready to retreat back to his quarters for his sleep cycle, when Reese's small voice stopped him. "Will you come back tomorrow?" the boy asked, his words slightly slurred with lingering weakness. Kale looked at the child, then at Lyra, whose face revealed nothing of her thoughts. "Yes," he said finally. "I'll come back." The following week brought a dangerous development. A station-wide security sweep, ostensibly to look for contraband goods, but rumored to be a search for suspected saboteurs. Kale worked a tense double shift, watching as security personnel methodically combed through each section. When he finally returned to the alcove, he found Lyra awake and alert despite the late hour, the children sleeping fitfully on the cot. "There's a security operation," he said without preamble. "They're searching everywhere, including supposedly unoccupied areas." Fear flickered across her face before she mastered it. "How close are they?" "2 sections away. They're being thorough." He ran a hand through his hair, mind racing through possibilities. "This place won't fool a dedicated scan. We need to move you." "Where?" The word carried the weight of someone who had already fled as far as possible. Kale hesitated. "There's one place they won't search. The maintenance shaft for the primary heat exchangers. It's marked as actively venting radiation, but that's another falsified reading from years ago. It's hot and uncomfortable, but it's safe for short periods." "How long will the searches last?" "A day, maybe 2. Lyra glanced at her sleeping children. "Reese is still weak." "I know," Kale acknowledged. "But if they find you here—" She closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. "When do we move?" "Now." while most of the station is on sleep cycle. The journey to the heat exchanger access was tense and painstaking. Alara walked silently beside her mother, while Kale carried the still drowsy Reese. They used service tunnels and maintenance crawl spaces, freezing in place whenever footsteps or voices echoed nearby. The heat exchanger shaft was as unpleasant as Kale had warned, cramped and sweltering, with the constant drone of machinery. He had brought what supplies he could carry inconspicuously: water, emergency rations, a portable cooling unit. "I'll come when it's safe," he promised, preparing to leave them. Lyra caught his arm, her touch startling him. "Be careful," she said quietly. "If they're searching for saboteurs, they may be looking for someone like you as well." The concern in her voice was unexpected. Kale nodded awkwardly. "I'll be back as soon as I can." The security sweep lasted 3 days, during which Kale could only make brief, risky visits to the heat exchanger shaft. On the 4th day, when the all-clear finally sounded, he found Lyra and the children exhausted but unharmed. As they made their way back to the relative comfort of the maintenance alcove, Reese stumbled, too weak to continue walking. Without hesitation, Kale lifted the boy onto his shoulders. Like a guardian transport, Reese murmured deliriously, his small hands gripping Kale's hair. "What's a guardian transport?" Kale asked, trying to keep the boy engaged and conscious. "From the stories," the child replied. "Great beasts that carried the honored dead to the celestial planes." Kale glanced questioningly at Lyra. "My husband told him the old stories," she explained softly. Before, it was the first time she had mentioned her husband. Kale wanted to ask more, but sensed it wasn't the moment. Instead, he adjusted his grip on Reese's legs and continued forward. Later, with the children finally asleep in the alcove, Lyra sat beside Kale in the narrow space by the door, their shoulders almost touching in the confined area. "The security sweep," she began hesitantly. "Was it for us?" Kale considered lying, then decided against it. Possibly. There were rumors of unauthorized persons aboard, but nothing specific about a woman and children. She absorbed this information silently. "Who are you running from, Lyra?" he asked quietly. For a long moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice barely audible. "My husband's family, the High Council of the Karathi Protectorate." She looked at her sleeping children. "My husband was Tariq Van, second heir to the Karathi sovereign. He died in the border skirmishes with the Alliance 6 months ago." Kale's eyes widened slightly. The Karathi Protectorate was a distant but significant power, known for its strictly hierarchical society and technological advancement. "You're a long way from Karathi space." "By design," she replied. "In our culture, when a highborn male dies, his widow and children become the property of his family line. The children are raised as proper Karathi, and the widow—" She trailed off. "The widow," Kale prompted, "serves the family in whatever capacity they deem appropriate." Her voice had gone flat. "Tariq knew what would happen. Before his last deployment, he made me promise that if he didn't return, I would take the children and flee. He left coordinates, contacts, resources hidden from his family. He didn't share their beliefs. He did once, but loving someone from outside, the Protectorate changed him." A sad smile touched her lips. "I was a diplomatic attaché from the freeholds when we met. An inappropriate match, but his status protected us. Until it couldn't. And now his family wants you back." "They want the children back," Lyra corrected. "Particularly Alara. She carries the genetic markers for navigator potential. Very valuable. Me, they want only to punish for the theft of Karathi bloodline." Kale absorbed this information slowly. "How did you get all the way to X7B? "We had help. Friends. Some of Tariq's military contacts who disagreed with the Protectorate's policies. But our last transport was discovered. The captain jettisoned us in an escape pod rather than surrender us." Her voice caught. "He and his crew paid for that choice. And you've been hiding here since?" She nodded. 3 weeks in the abandoned cargo bay. The access codes Tariq gave me only work for the outer sections. We couldn't reach the inner station where there might be passage outward. "The Karathi influence doesn't extend this far," Kale said thoughtfully. "But they have allies who do." "Yes." and bounty hunters who care nothing for politics, only credit transfers. Lyra turned to face him directly. Now you know our burden. I understand if you want us gone. Cale met her gaze. If I wanted you gone, I wouldn't have helped you this far. Why are you helping us? She asked, the question that had hung between them for weeks. He looked away. I told you about the 37 people I couldn't save. I don't need 38, 39, and 40 on my conscience too. Is that the only reason? The question hung in the air between them. Cale was saved from answering by a small sound from the cot. Alara, whimpering in her sleep. Lyra immediately moved to her daughter's side, stroking her hair and murmuring soft words in what must have been her native language. The girl settled without fully waking. Cale watched the tenderness of a gesture, feeling like an intruder on something precious and fragile. He stood quietly. I should go. My shift starts in 4 hours. Lyra nodded without looking up. Thank you. For everything. Try to rest, he said, and slipped out the hidden door. As weeks stretched into months, a fragile routine emerged. Cale worked his shifts, gathered supplies, and spent his off hours in the maintenance alcove with Lyra and the children. The space, once barely large enough for one, gradually transformed into something resembling a home. Reese recovered his strength, revealing himself to be a curious and talkative child with his mother's melodic accent and quick smile. Alara remained more reserved, but her silence took on a different quality, observant rather than fearful. She began to help Cale with simple maintenance tasks, her small fingers deftly handling tools and components as he explained their functions. You're a natural engineer, he told her one day as she correctly identified a faulty circuit without prompting. She looked up at him, solemn as always. Father said I have the sight. For patterns. Navigator potential, Cale murmured, remembering Lyra's words. Alara nodded. That's why they want me back. To put me in a navigation academy. A shadow passed over her young face. The children there don't have mothers. Only instructors. Cale hesitated, then awkwardly patted her shoulder. Well, they can't have you. The girl studied him carefully. Promise. Promise, he replied, surprised by the fierceness of his own conviction. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Lyra presented him with a small object, a medallion crafted from scrap metal, etched with intricate patterns. Alara made this for you, she explained. It's a Korathi guardian symbol. For protection. Cale turned the medallion over in his hands, touched by the unexpected gift. She's very talented. Yes. Lyra sat beside him, closer than usual. She's also very cautious about who she trusts. She doesn't give gifts lightly. He looked at her questioningly. What I mean, Lyra continued carefully, is that we have imposed on your kindness for too long. You've given us shelter, food, safety, and asked for nothing in return. You don't owe me anything, Cale said automatically. Perhaps not, but we've become. She paused, searching for the right word. A burden you never agreed to bear long-term. You're not a burden, he replied, surprised by how much he meant it. Nevertheless, we cannot hide in this alcove forever. Reese needs proper education. Alara needs space to grow. She took a deep breath. And I need to find a way to support my children without endangering our protector. Protector. The word settled uncomfortably on Cale's shoulders. What are you suggesting? I've been studying the station maps you brought. There's a civilian section where transient workers live. If I could find work there, perhaps as a maintenance assistant or in food preparation. It's too dangerous, Cale interrupted. The civilian sections have regular identity checks. Without proper documentation, which you could help create, she suggested carefully. You've mentioned your skill with the station systems. Cale fell silent, turning the medallion over in his hands. What she proposed would mean crossing a line from passive assistance to active fraud, creating false identities, manipulating station records. The kind of offense that would mean detention and exile if discovered. Yet the alternative, continuing indefinitely in this precarious limbo, or worse, watching them attempt to survive without him, was somehow more unthinkable. It would take time, he said finally, and it would mean taking significant risks. Hope flickered in Lyra's eyes. We have time. and risks are familiar companions to us now. Their fingers brushed as she reached for the medallion, ostensibly to show him a detail of the design. Neither pulled away immediately. "I'll see what I can do," Kale promised. Creating false identities required weeks of careful preparation. Kale used his maintenance access to study the station's security protocols, identifying vulnerabilities and planning his approach. Lyra proved an unexpected asset, her diplomatic training giving her insight into bureaucratic systems that complemented his technical knowledge. During this time, their living arrangement evolved. Kale gradually moved most of his possessions into the alcove, his formal quarters becoming little more than a decoy. The children began to expect his presence, looking up eagerly when the door opened at the end of his shifts. "Kale!" Reese would exclaim, rushing to show him whatever discovery or creation had occupied his day. Even Alara's reserved demeanor softened, her rare smiles becoming less rare in his presence. One evening, as Kale returned from his shift, he found Lyra teaching the children what appeared to be a formal dance, graceful movements confined to the small, clear space in the center of the alcove. She wore a dress fashioned from repurposed fabric, her hair arranged in an intricate style he hadn't seen before. "It's the Festival of Ascension," she explained, noticing his curious expression. "An important Karathi holiday. I wanted them to remember their heritage, the beautiful parts of it." Kale watched them move through the choreographed steps, Reese laughing as he stumbled, Alara executing each movement with precise grace. "Join us," Reese called, waving him over. "I don't know the steps," Kale demurred. "Mother can teach you," Alara suggested, with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "She taught father, and he said he had the grace of a mining excavator." Lyra's eyes crinkled with surprised laughter at her daughter's rare joke. She's right. Tarek was a terrible dancer until his fourth lesson. Something in Kale hesitated at the casual mention of Lyra's husband, a man who loomed in their shared history as both protector and shadow. But Reese was already pulling at his hand, and he found himself in the center of the room, attempting to follow Lyra's patient instructions. "Your right foot crosses behind, then step to the side." "Yes, like that," she guided, her hand lightly on his shoulder. "Now turn." Kale turned the wrong way, nearly colliding with her. They both stepped back quickly, laughing. "Perhaps I'm worse than a mining excavator," he admitted. "You just need practice," Lyra assured him, her eyes bright with amusement. For a moment, the cramped alcove with its salvaged furnishings disappeared, and they were simply a family sharing a celebration. The realization startled Kale. When had he begun thinking of them as his family? The moment was shattered by the sudden blare of station-wide alarms. "What is it?" Lyra asked, instantly alert, pulling the children close. Kale moved to the terminal he'd rigged to access station announcements. "Security alert. They're reporting a Karathi diplomatic vessel has docked, requesting assistance in a fugitive search." The color drained from Lyra's face. "They found us." "They haven't found you yet," Kale corrected, mind racing. "But we need to accelerate our plan." Over the next 24 hours, they barely slept. Kale used his shift access to enter the identity management systems, creating documentation for Lyra Darren and her children, supposedly recent transfers from another mining operation. He fabricated work records, medical histories, and living assignments, inserting them carefully into the station's databases. "Will it hold up to scrutiny?" Lyra asked as he showed her the identity cards he'd created. "For routine checks, yes," he replied honestly. "Against Karathi investigation methods? I don't know." They decided to move immediately to the assigned civilian quarters, a risk, but less dangerous than remaining in an unregistered space during a focus search. Kale helped them transfer their few possessions through service corridors, avoiding main thoroughfares where security presence had intensified. The civilian quarters were marginally better than the alcove, a single room with attached sanitation unit, assigned to transient workers. Anonymous and Spartan, but legitimate. "I'll come when I can," Kale promised as he prepared to leave them. "But we should minimize contact until we know more about the Karathi presence." Lyra nodded, though fear lingered in her eyes. "Be careful if they discover your involvement." "They won't," he assured her, with more confidence than he felt. 3 tense days passed. Kale observed the Karathi representatives from a distance during his maintenance rounds. Aristocratic figures in formal attire, escorted by station security. Their presence sent ripples of unease through the station population. The Protectorate's reputation for ruthless efficiency was well known. On the 4th day, as Kale repaired a ventilation grill near the administrative offices, he overheard a conversation that turned his blood cold. The Karathi representative was quite specific, said a voice he recognized as belonging to the station's security chief. They're looking for a woman and 2 children. The woman is considered a kidnapper, took the children from their rightful guardians after their father's death. Do we have descriptions? Asked another voice. Better than that. They've provided genetic markers to scan for. Apparently, the girl has some rare genetic profile they're particularly interested in recovering. Genetic scanning the entire station population will take weeks. They're prioritizing civilian sectors, particularly recent arrivals. The diplomatic vessel is prepared to wait. Kale moved away before he could be noticed, heart pounding. Genetic scans would bypass any identity fraud, no matter how carefully crafted. They needed to leave the station immediately. That night, he made his way to the civilian quarters through a circuitous route, checking constantly for surveillance. When Lyra opened the door, her expression told him she'd already heard the news. They're scanning, she said simply. Yes, we have maybe 2 days before they reach this sector. Kale moved further into the room, lowering his voice. There's only one option left. We need to get you off station. Ow! The despair in her voice was palpable. The Karathi vessel will monitor all official departures. Not all vessels go through official channels, Kale replied. There's a salvage captain, Marcos. He specializes in discreet transport. A smuggler, Lyra, translated. Essentially, he owes me a favor. Kale didn't elaborate on how he'd once overlooked a serious environmental violation on Marcos's previous vessel. He's departing tomorrow for the mining collective on Europa Station. It's independent territory outside both Karathi and Central Authority jurisdiction. Hope flickered across Lyra's face, quickly replaced by suspicion. What's the cost? I've arranged payment, Kale said, avoiding specifics. His life savings and some equipment of questionable provenance would cover their passage. When do we leave? Alara asked quietly from the corner where she sat with Reese. Kale hesitated. The original plan was for you 3 to go. Lyra's eyes narrowed. Original plan? I've been reconsidering, he admitted. If I stay behind, there will be questions. Eventually, they might connect me to you. So you'll come with us? Reese asked eagerly. It's complicated. Kale hedged, not wanting to get the boys' hopes up. I need to cover our tracks here first. Make sure they can't follow. How will you do that? Lyra asked. I have access to the environmental systems, Kale explained. If there was a localized containment issue in the database center, nothing dangerous, but enough to corrupt certain files, it might erase evidence of your presence and our connection. Sabotage, Lyra said flatly. Controlled inconvenience, Kale corrected. No one gets hurt this time. This time, the words hung between them, acknowledgement of the weight he still carried. When do we need to decide? Lyra asked finally. Tonight, Kale replied. Marcos departs at 0600 tomorrow. After the children had fallen asleep, Kale and Lyra sat in the dim light of the civilian quarters, voices lowered to whispers. Your life is here, Lyra said. Your work, your home. You've already sacrificed so much for us. What life? Kale asked with unexpected bitterness. Maintaining ventilation systems until I die of radiation poisoning or station management. Find a reason to replace me. Being the ghost everyone avoids talking to. He shook his head. There's nothing here for me, Lyra. And what would be waiting on Europa Station? A fresh start. For all of us. He met her gaze directly. Unless you'd prefer I didn't come. Don't be absurd, she replied quickly. The children would be devastated. She hesitated. We need you. The admission seemed to cost her something. A final surrender of the independence she had fought so hard to maintain. But there was something else in her eyes, too. Something that made Kale's heart beat faster. Then it's decided, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "We leave together in the morning." The plan required precise timing and more than a little luck. Kale would create the containment issue just before shift change, when staffing was minimal. Lyra and the children would make their way to the secondary cargo bay using the credentials he'd created, where Marcos would be waiting with his salvage vessel. If anything goes wrong, Kale instructed, continue to the rendezvous point. Marcos has instructions to wait exactly 20 minutes past the scheduled time. Not 1 minute more. Lyra nodded, her face set in determined lines. We'll be there. All of us. The station's night cycle passed quickly, the artificial lighting shifting to morning illumination all too soon. Kale left early to begin his shift, touching Alara's and Reese's heads gently as they slept, exchanging one last meaningful glance with Lyra before stepping out. The maintenance access corridors were nearly empty, most workers still preparing for their day. Kale moved with purpose toward the environmental control nexus, the station's heart where all life support systems converged. His access badge worked, as always, the system recognizing him as just another technician performing routine checks. At precisely 0530, he initiated the sequence he had carefully planned. A small, contained cooling fluid leak in the secondary processors, enough to trigger automated containment protocols that would seal the database servers and initiate emergency backup procedures. In the system confusion, his carefully planned subroutines would corrupt specific identity records rather than preserving them. The alarms began exactly as predicted, localized and urgent, but not station-wide. Emergency teams rushed past him as he calmly worked at a nearby console, apparently assisting with containment efforts while actually ensuring his sabotage achieved its purpose. Maintenance. A security officer approached, breathing heavily. We need to reroute processing power from non-essential systems. Can you access the grid from here? Already on it, Kale replied, his voice professionally neutral as he worked. Containment protocols are functioning normally. Estimated resolution in 40 minutes. Just enough time for Marcos to clear the docking procedures before anyone could establish connection to the compromised databases. Good work, the officer said, already turning away to manage the gathering crowd of concerned technicians. Kale waited another precisely calculated 5 minutes before quietly stepping away, his part of the sabotage complete. Now he needed to reach the secondary cargo bay, taking a circuitous route to avoid security checkpoints that would have been alerted to the system anomalies. Meanwhile, Lyra led the children through the civilian corridors, her posture confident despite the fear churning inside her. They carried almost nothing, a single bag with essential medications for Reese and a change of clothes. Anything more would attract attention. "Remember," she murmured to Alara, "if anyone asks, we're going to your programming lesson in Educational Center B." Alara nodded, her small face composed in a perfect mask of childish innocence that broke Lyra's heart. No child should be so skilled at deception, so familiar with danger. They passed a security checkpoint near the transit junction, and Lyra felt cold sweat form on her back as a scanner hummed. But the guards were distracted, receiving reports about the system malfunction in the database center, and waved them through with barely a glance. Almost there, Lyra whispered encouragingly to Reese, who clung to her hand with unusual silence. The cargo sector was busier than expected, workers rushing to complete loadings before the system issues affected shipping manifests. Lyra navigated through the chaos, following Kale's detailed instructions toward the smaller, private docking bays used by independent contractors. Bay 17 appeared empty at first glance, but as they approached, a shadow detached itself from the wall, a broad-shouldered man with a heavily scarred face and calculating eyes. "You the package?" he asked gruffly, looking past them as if expecting someone else. "Yes," Lyra replied steadily, using the code phrase Kale had provided. "We're looking for a scenic route to Europa." The man, Marcos, presumably, grunted in acknowledgement. "Where's Kale?" "Coming separately," Lyra explained, fighting to keep her voice even. There was a system issue he needed to manage first. Marcos's expression darkened. That wasn't the arrangement. Payment on delivery, all passengers present. He paid you already, Lyra said firmly, though uncertainty flared. Had Kale truly secured their passage? Half, Marcos corrected. The other half is his presence. I need a systems engineer for my operation. He knows that. Lyra felt Alara's hand tighten in hers. If Kale's payment included his own skills rather than just credits or goods. He'll be here, she assured Marcos, hoping desperately it was true. We have to wait. Marcos checked a battered timepiece on his wrist. 15 minutes. Then we launch, with or without him. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Reese began to fidget anxiously, sensing the tension. Alara stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the corridor entrance. Time's almost up, Marcos announced, his voice devoid of sympathy. I've got a launch window, and central authority breathing down my neck about this system failure affecting clearances. Please, Lyra began, trying to formulate an argument, a plea, anything that would buy more time. He's coming, Alara said suddenly, pointing toward the far end of the corridor. And there he was, Kale, moving quickly but not running, which would have attracted attention. His face was flushed, a thin sheen of sweat visible even at a distance, but his expression remained composed. Technical difficulties, he explained as he reached them, exchanging a knowing glance with Marcos. Everything's prepared. Cutting it close, Marcos growled, but stepped aside to reveal the airlock to his vessel. Get aboard. We're launching immediately. The salvage vessel was nothing like the sleek passenger shuttles of the Central Systems. Its interior was cramped, utilitarian, with cargo webbing covering most surfaces and the pervasive scent of mechanical fluids. But to Lyra, as the airlock sealed behind them, it was more beautiful than any luxury transport. Secure yourselves, Marcos ordered, climbing into the pilot's chair. Departure might be rough if station control decides to ask questions. Kale helped the children into acceleration couches clearly designed for adults, improvising restraints from the cargo webbing. His hands lingered on Reese's shoulders. You okay, buddy? The boy nodded bravely. Are we really leaving forever? Yes, Kale confirmed, his voice gentle but firm. But we're all going together. All of us? Alara asked, her piercing gaze fixed on Kale's face. All of us, he promised, meeting her eyes with equal intensity. I'm not leaving you. The engines rumbled to life, vibrations shuddering through the ship's frame. Lyra reached out instinctively, her hand finding Kale's as the vessel detached from its moorings. Departure clearance granted. Marcos called from the cockpit, surprise evident in his voice. Your distraction must have been more effective than expected, Kale. Let's hope so, Kale replied, though his expression remained tense. The viewport showed X-7b asteroid mining station receding rapidly, its rusted, industrial bulk shrinking against the vastness of space. None of them spoke as the station, prison and shelter both, disappeared from view. Only when they made the jump to Translight Drive, the vibration changing to a higher pitch as stars blurred outside the viewport, did Kale finally relax his grip on Lyra's hand. We made it, he said quietly. What happens now? Lyra asked, equally soft. Kale's eyes moved from her face to the children, now peering excitedly through the viewport at the streaming stars. Now we start living instead of just surviving. The journey to Europa Station took 3 days in Marcos's battered vessel. Despite the cramped quarters and limited resources, it was the most peaceful time they had experienced since their paths crossed. Free from the constant fear of discovery, the children blossomed, Reese exploring every accessible corner of the ship with irrepressible curiosity, Alara engaging Marcos in surprisingly technical discussions about navigation systems. Kale worked alongside Marcos, his engineering skills proving valuable as they managed the temperamental propulsion systems. Lyra often found him explaining some mechanical principle to the children, his patience seemingly infinite as Reese asked endless questions. In the ship's quiet night cycle, when the children slept in the small cabin Marcos had cleared for them, Lyra and Kale sat together in the observation nook, watching the universe stream past. They will still search for us, Lyra said on the second night, giving voice to the fear that never completely disappeared. Europa Station is beyond their jurisdiction, Kale reminded her. And it's just our first stop. The outer colonies are vast and largely independent, but we'll always be looking over our shoulders. Kale considered this, then shook his head slowly. Maybe at first, but eventually, we'll just be another family trying to make a life. Unremarkable, forgettable to anyone except ourselves. Family. The word hung between them, neither acknowledging it directly, but both feeling its weight. What will you do? Lyra asked. On Europa? There's always work for engineers, he replied, especially those willing to get their hands dirty with actual repairs rather than just system design. He glanced at her. What about you? I have diplomatic training, she said thoughtfully. Languages, cultural studies, perhaps translation work or teaching. The children could attend actual school, Kale suggested, his tone warming. Make friends. Learn without fear. Lyra smiled at the thought, though it was tinged with sadness. They've forgotten what that's like. Especially Alara. They'll remember, Kale assured her. Children are resilient. Yes, Lyra agreed, watching his profile in the dim light. Thank you. For everything. For coming with us. Kale turned to meet her gaze. I couldn't have stayed, knowing you were out there somewhere, wondering if you were safe. He hesitated, then added, You three gave me something I thought I'd lost forever after the accident. A purpose. A chance to choose differently. Lyra's hand found his in the darkness, fingers intertwining. No more words were needed. Europa Station appeared first as a glittering constellation against the blackness of space, then resolved into a sprawling structure of interconnected modules orbiting Jupiter's ice-covered moon. Unlike X-7B's industrial brutalism, Europa Station was a testament to pragmatic innovation, a hub for independent traders, scientists, and those seeking life beyond the reach of central authorities. Welcome to your new home, Marcos announced as they approached the docking ring. It's not paradise, but it's free. Mostly. Kale stood with Lyra and the children at the viewport, watching the station grow larger. It's beautiful, he said softly. It's big, Reese observed with wide eyes. There are trees inside, Marcos told the boy. Real ones, in the central agricultural dome. An actual gravity, not just the artificial kind. Alara looked up at Kale. Will we have our own place? Yes, he promised. I have credits enough for temporary housing. Then we'll find something permanent. Together? She pressed, her gaze unwavering. Kale glanced at Lyra, a question in his eyes. She nodded almost imperceptibly. Together, he confirmed, and for the first time since he'd known her, Alara smiled without reservation. The docking procedures went smoothly. Europa Station was accustomed to processing new arrivals with minimal bureaucracy. Their fabricated identities from X-7B were discarded in favor of new ones provided by Marcos' contacts, listed simply as a family unit seeking residency. No questions about origins, no genetic scans. I have business in the trading sector, Marcos told them as they prepared to disembark. But I've arranged temporary quarters for you in Residential Ring B. It's not fancy, but it's clean and secure. Thank you, Kale said, extending his hand. For everything. Marcos shook it firmly. My debt is paid. But my offer stands. There's always work for a good engineer on my runs. I'll remember that, Kale promised, though they both knew he was unlikely to return to the nomadic life of a salvage crew. Their first steps onto Europa Station were overwhelming after months of confinement. The docking area opened into a vast central concourse bustling with activity. Merchants from a dozen different cultures, the scent of real food cooking, ambient lighting designed to mimic natural sunlight. Reese clung to Kale's hand, wide-eyed at the sensory overload. Alara stayed close to her mother, watchful as always, but with wonder rather than fear in her expression. This way, Kale guided them, following the directions Marcos had provided to their temporary housing. Residential Ring B proved to be a modest but well-maintained section, populated by working families rather than the station's wealthier residents. Their assigned quarters were simple, 2 small bedrooms, a common area with basic cooking facilities, and a sanitation unit. But after the maintenance alcove and cramped ship quarters, it seemed luxuriously spacious. Home, Lyra said, experimentally testing the word. For now, Cale agreed, until we find something more permanent. The children explored the space with uncharacteristic excitement, Reese bouncing on the sleeping platform in the smaller bedroom, Elara examining the environmental controls with technical curiosity. Can we go see the trees? Reese asked eagerly. Tomorrow, Lyra promised, after we've all rested. Later, with the children finally asleep in their own room, a luxury they hadn't experienced since leaving Karathi space. Lyra and Cale sat together in the common area, sharing a meal of station rations that nevertheless tasted like a feast after months of survival eating. We made it, Lyra said softly, echoing Cale's words from a ship. We did, he agreed, though I keep expecting alarms to sound or security to burst through the door. That feeling may take time to fade, Lyra acknowledged. For all of us. A comfortable silence fell between them, the first truly peaceful moment they had shared. What are you thinking? Cale asked eventually, noticing her distant expression. Lyra considered the question seriously. I'm thinking about Tarek, she admitted, about what he hoped for when he sent us away from the Protectorate. Cale tensed slightly at the mention of her husband, but nodded for her to continue. He wanted us to be safe, of course, Lyra said. But more than that, he wanted us to live freely, to build something new. Her eyes met Cale's. I think he would be grateful to you for helping us find that chance. I'm sure he was a good man, Cale said carefully. He was, Lyra agreed, and he would understand what has happened between us. Cale's breath caught. What has happened between us? Lyra reached across the small table, her fingers brushing his. We've become a family, haven't we? Not by blood or tradition or law, but by choice. Is that what you want? Cale asked, his voice low and hesitant. For us to be a family? It's what we already are, Lyra replied simply. The question is what kind of family we want to build here, in this new place. Cale turned his hand to properly hold hers. I don't have much experience with family. Not the healthy kind, anyway. Neither do I, Lyra admitted. In the Protectorate, family was about duty and bloodlines, not this. She gestured vaguely between them. And what is this exactly? Cale asked, a hint of challenge in his voice. Lyra's smile was slow but certain. Something worth crossing the stars for. She leaned forward slightly. Something I thought I'd never find again after Tarek died. Something I wasn't looking for in a maintenance alcove on a forgotten mining station. Cale moved around the table until he was beside her, their hands still joined. I spent 5 years trying to disappear after the accident, trying to become invisible. His free hand rose to touch her face gently. Then you saw me. We saw each other, Lyra corrected softly. When they finally kissed, it felt less like a beginning than a continuation, acknowledgement of what had been growing in the shared darkness of X, 7B, in the quiet moments of shared danger and tentative trust, in the countless small kindnesses and sacrifices that had brought them across the void to this new world. The following weeks established the foundations of their new life. Cale secured work quickly, his engineering skills valuable in a station always in need of technical expertise. Lyra found a position in the diplomatic section, helping facilitate communication between Europa's diverse population and visiting traders. The children thrived. As Cale had predicted, access to Europa's education center, a progressive institution that welcomed students from all backgrounds, transformed them. Reese made friends easily, his natural exuberance returning with each passing day. Alara's progress was more measured but no less significant. She excelled in technical subjects and slowly began to trust her teachers. They found permanent housing in a family residential section, a modest but comfortable dwelling with an actual viewport overlooking Jupiter's swirling storms. In the evenings, they gathered there, watching the gas giants changing colors as they shared the day's experiences. Sometimes, Lyra would catch Cale looking at the three of them with an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe they were real. On one such evening, with the children already asleep, she confronted him gently. You still seem surprised sometimes, she observed. That we're here, together. Kale smiled ruefully. I keep waiting for it all to disappear, to wake up back in that maintenance alcove, alone again. It's real, she assured him, taking his hand and placing it against her heart. We're real. I know, he said. It's just, for so long, I defined myself by my failures, by what I'd lost. I never imagined I could find this, a second chance, a family, he corrected. People who know the worst of me and choose me anyway. Lyra's expression softened. The worst of you is still better than most people's best, Kale. You saved us when no one else would. When it would have been easier, safer, to look away. Maybe I saved myself too, he admitted. You gave me a reason to live again, not just exist. They settled into a life that, while not without challenges, held a contentment neither had thought possible during those dark days on X-7B. Kale's nightmares about the 37 lives lost gradually decreased, though they never disappeared entirely. Lyra's watchfulness eased, though she still tensed when Korathi traders visited the station. 6 months after their arrival, as they celebrated Reese's birthday with an actual cake, a luxury that brought tears to Lyra's eyes, Elara presented Kale with a gift. It was a drawing, meticulously rendered with the precision that characterized everything she did, showing the 4 of them standing together against a backdrop of stars. It's us, she explained unnecessarily. Our family. Kale studied the drawing, noting how she had positioned him beside Lyra, their hands linked with the children protected between them. It's beautiful, Elara. Thank you. The girl hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been weighing on her. Are you going to be our father now? The room fell silent. Reese looked up from his cake, suddenly attentive. Lyra watched Kale carefully, not intervening. Kale set the drawing down gently and looked directly at Elara. I'll never replace your father, he said honestly. He loved you very much, and he saved your lives by helping you escape. I respect him for that. Elara nodded solemnly, waiting for him to continue. But if you're asking if I love you and your brother and your mother, and if I want to be your family forever, Kale continued, then the answer is yes. With all my heart. So what should we call you? Reese asked practically, mouth still full of cake. Kale glanced at Lyra, who smiled encouragingly. You can call me whatever feels right to you, he told the children. I'm honored to be part of your family, no matter what name you use. Elara considered this seriously, then nodded as if reaching a decision. I think father would be confusing, since we had one already. But dad is different. She tested the word carefully. Dad. I like dad. Reese agreed enthusiastically. It's short. Kale felt something in his chest tighten and expand simultaneously. Then dad, it is, he managed, his voice thick with emotion. Later that night, after the celebration had ended and the dwelling was quiet, Kale and Lyra stood at the viewport, watching Jupiter's eternal storms. Are you okay with this? He asked quietly. The children calling me dad? More than okay, Lyra assured him. Tarek would want them to have a father who loves them, who chooses them freely, not out of obligation to bloodlines or tradition. And what about you? Kale asked, turning to face her fully. What do you want? Lyra's smile was radiant in the dim light. I was considered worthless without a male in Korathi society. But you never saw me that way. You saw me as strong, capable, complete. She touched his face gently. What I want is a partner who sees me. And that's exactly what I have. There are traditions here on Europa too, Kale said carefully. Ways for people to formally recognize their commitment to each other. If that's something you might want someday. Someday, Lyra agreed. But we're already committed where it matters most. She gestured to the dwelling around them, to the rooms where their children slept peacefully. This is our truth, whatever names or ceremonies might follow. Kale pulled her close, both of them turning to watch the swirling storms of Jupiter. From such a distance, even a massive tempest seemed beautiful rather than destructive, patterns of light and shadow dancing across the face of the giant world. From ash to starlight, Lyra murmured, quoting an old Korathi saying. From darkness to dawn. From survival to living, Kale added, understanding the sentiment perfectly. Beyond the viewport, Europa Station continued its eternal orbit, carrying its thousands of souls through the darkness of space. Among them, in a modest dwelling filled with hard-won peace, a family born of desperation and courage looked toward the future, not with certainty, but with hope. And for now, that was enough.